lot of unverified reports have circulated regarding Iran and Russia's relationship. Professor Marandi, there's been a lot of reports about Russia-Iran cooperation of late, over the last month or so, but even in just the last few days, talks about Russia giving Iran S-400 capabilities, boosting its air defenses. What do you make of these reports? Because all of them are coming from Israeli media themselves. Do we see these reports as simply fake news or a reflection, possibly, of a very real development that may be causing consternation on the side of US and Israel?
I wouldn't know um, top secret information, obviously. If I did, I wouldn't be able to say it anyway, but I don't have that sort of information. What I can say is that the Russians have always been very, they were, for a long time, they were very scared of the Americans. And the Iranian Russian cooperation was always limited, even when Iran purchased weapons or radar or uh, air defense capabilities, the Russians would not hand it over, or the deal would fall through because the Russians were relatively weaker, and back then, and the Americans relatively stronger. The same is true with China, or was true with China. After Ukraine, the relationship evolved dramatically, and the Iranians and the Russians began cooperating much more extensively than before in almost all fields. And Iran has technology that's useful to the Russians. The Russians have technology that's useful for the Iranians. So that has changed. But how Iran has created its own air defense capabilities. It has its own radar systems because, as I said, back until Ukraine, the Russians weren't cooperating nearly as much as the Iranians would have wanted. But after that, things changed. So during the years, Iran not only did it develop its own drone and missile capabilities, it developed its own naval warships, its own radar systems, its own surface-to-air missiles. It's developing fighter jets. It's moving forward. It's not necessarily where it wants to be, but it is probably one of the most military advanced countries in the world today as a result of those sanctions. But Russian cooperation with Iran after Ukraine has changed dramatically at all levels: economic, political, and military relations. What has Iran perhaps purchased from Russia over the last few months? I don't know. What capabilities do the Russians have that would be useful for Iran under these circumstances? Again, I'm not quite sure because I'm not. I fought in a war many years ago, but I haven't. I'm not like Scott Ritter or some other people who have been in the military for a very long time and would know more about these things. So I would put that question to people like him, but I don't have that sort of insider knowledge. But what I can say is that for Iran, the best defense is offense. The assumption is that whatever Iran has, or has made itself or has purchased from other countries like the Russians or the Chinese or whoever else, at the end of the day, if Iran is attacked, uh, there will be destruction. And so the best way to create deterrence is for Iran to have a very powerful offensive capability. And that Iran does have. And if the Americans, if the Washington Post wants to make its readers feel good about American strength and about Israeli strength and how this genocidal regime is strong thanks to the Americans, they can do that. But they should then think about the day after when Iran has responded and massive devastation has been created in Tel Aviv and elsewhere. And Israel is very vulnerable. The Iranians can knock out its electricity, can knock out its port, it can knock out its energy capabilities, its energy storage centers. Israel is a small regime, and remember, it's half of the population that it's of Israel are Palestinian. They're like, prisoners. But if the regime weakens, if there's chaos, then subjugating the Palestinians becomes all the more difficult. And waging war in Gaza against women and children, and in Lebanon against Hezbollah becomes all the more difficult. So the Israelis are making a very, very grave mistake. But as I said, I think that Netanyahu, it could be in their arrogance. I think that the Iranians won't dare to strike back, which I think is uh, is foolish. But I think probably Netanyahu knows that Iran will strike back and strike back hard, but he is calculating that he can bring in the Americans, and that would lead to consequences that we don't even want to think about, because from New York to San Francisco, from South Africa to Japan, that would bring about complete change. And then you would have poverty like never before, and tens of millions of people would be on the move, if not many tens of millions of people. And they would probably mostly be going to Europe and the United States, because these are the traditional routes, even though things will be collapsing there as well. Right now, I've been told, and I've read, that Syrians in Lebanon are leaving Lebanon and going back to Syria and moving from Syria to Turkey. So when the West helps the Israeli regime carry out genocidal attacks, they have consequences, like the dirty war in Syria. The refugees from Syria was their undoing. They and regional countries carried out the dirty war, and then millions of Syrian refugees went to Turkey and to Europe, and they still have huge problems there. So I don't want to, I don't want to create fear. I don't want to be tough or anything like that. I said this on Al Jazeera yesterday on their show Inside Story. I don't want to be tough. I want to say how things really are. If you recall, I've been saying for quite a long time that Iran will retaliate, and it will retaliate in a very significant way. And people were ridiculing me and saying Iran is not going to retaliate. This is all talk. Well, we saw that it was not empty talk. That was the tip of the iceberg. So Iran-Russian relations have evolved dramatically over the last 2.5 years. I think a bit more than about 2.5 years now. But as I said, Iran's most important weapon is its offensive weapons, its missile and drone capabilities that can be used immediately to strike the Israeli regime.
Yeah, and when I see these reports, Professor Marandi, about Russia and Iran, for example, there is something that's often not stated, which is Iran, Hezbollah, the resistance in and of itself. They often say that they have the capacity to fight their own battles.
Oh,
And,
absolutely.
and when it comes to, though, these reports, what I see, and I'm curious about your thoughts, is you mentioned something earlier about Israel making a grave mistake. And I think one of its biggest mistakes has been completely and totally isolating itself on the world stage to the point where only the United States is really behind them. And I think that the fear, because even in Jerusalem Post recently, an old meeting, this is just reported after Iran's attack, an old meeting between the top advisor to the supreme leader of Iran and Russia's foreign ministry, a meeting that happened weeks ago was being used as a reason to say that Russia-Iran ties are a security concern. And for me, how I read that is that Israel, and I believe the United States too, are actually very worried about the fact that it isn't Iran that's becoming more and more isolated. it's Israel that's becoming more isolated, and that only spells more problems for this broader regional conflict that it is spurring in the wake of now a 1 year of genocide in Gaza. What are your thoughts about this?
That's absolutely true, and it's not just countries like Russia or China and others that are increasingly being vocal in condemning Israel. The Chinese have asked their citizens to leave. The Russians have asked their citizens to leave, from what I recall. And these are major statements. Uh, they are symbolic. And of course, as you rightly pointed out, Iran is more than capable of defending itself. We've seen how in Syria, as you alluded to, the Russians really haven't been, even though they've been given bases and assets in Syria, but they haven't been really protecting Syria as much as some expect. But so I don't think Iran is ever going to depend on Russia or count on Russia to do anything for it. But Israel is isolated, and the rise of BRICS. We all discuss these sort of things nowadays. The rise of BRICS is isolating the West, and Israel is a part of that, uh, the West. And while you're right that the Americans are fully behind, the only country that fully support the Israelis militarily and otherwise, but the whole West is behind them. No one will sanction them. No one will punish them. All of them will gather intelligence. All of them will uh, support them financially. They'll give them political cover. They'll give them, as I said, intelligence. They will give them weapons when the Israelis need it, especially the Germans. They have more capabilities than the others. So Canada, the EU, um, the UK, Australia, New Zealand, the Five Eyes, all of them are complicit in the genocide and the Holocaust in Gaza. All of them are very much on board, but Israel is being isolated across the world, across the global South, and even among public opinion in the West. But what is also important, and this is something that I think many don't calculate, is that and the rage in the region, the anger in the region is reaching a boiling point. And people are looking and seeing that Hezbollah is fighting Israel, Hamas and Islamic Jihad are fighting, Iran is fighting, but their governments, the government of Turkey, continues to have diplomatic relations. Uh, Oil from the Republic of Azerbaijan goes right through Turkey, cheap oil, this uh, going to Israel. Jordan, you have all these countries that are working with Israel, and the discontent is enormous. So if it, we could reach a stage where some of these regimes become unstable, and I think that they are very vulnerable to instability. And if one becomes unstable, then many of them can become unstable. So the Americans are risking a lot right now. They're isolating themselves. They've wrecked their image across the world, the West, the collective West, because the world sees all this Holocaust as an American Holocaust, a European Holocaust, a Canadian Holocaust, a British genocide, the, um, in New Zealand genocide, also because Australian genocide. All of them are part of this. None of them can hide the fact that they are deeply involved in the crimes that the Israelis are carrying out on a daily basis, and the rest of the world sees this. So their image has been shattered. Their economy is in big trouble. The war in Ukraine, of course, continues. This is not a situation that the Americans can handle. This is not the 1990s. The United States of the 1990s no longer exists. This is a completely different world. But the mentality of the elites in the West, in Western capitals in the United States, in these prestigious newspapers and so on, is still that we are number one. This is the United States of 30 years ago. They've carried out so many endless wars. They've depleted their capabilities so extensively while countries across the world have been on the rise that they simply cannot continue this way.
Yes, the American exceptionalism still very much runs on high. And then, lastly, on this note, Professor Marandi, the fact of the matter is, it seems, is that Israel and the United States, of course, very close behind it. And I think it was a great point that you made that the entire collective West is indeed doing much to ensure Israel's so-called protection. But what's so interesting is that Israel seems not to care at all about what you would think are matters that it would care about. Now, it's quite clear, and anyone who watches this program or listens to you, that Israel does not care about people, civilians. It doesn't care about Palestinians. It doesn't care about the region, people in the region. It doesn't care because it, in fact, is a regime that enjoys this kind of massive campaign of destruction and genocide. And it has every interest in its mind to carry this out. But on the other hand, as you mentioned, these other concerns, for example, economically, even just the inherent need for stability as a colony, it seems to be throwing all of that out the window. There is no engagement in anything that could be called diplomacy. There is no engagement in anything that could be called attempting to reap stability in the wake of what is just an out of control situation for itself. Why do you think at this stage, at this moment, Israel has decided that, or maybe Israel has not decided, just can't control the fact that it has essentially given up all of these other concerns?
A lot of the decisions that are made in the world that we live in are not necessarily based on reason and logic. They're based on emotions and anger, outrage, or and other emotions. And I think that the Israeli regime, their people, their decision makers, they are very much influenced by that. They consider themselves to be a superior people. The very fact that they call Palestinians God, Amalek, the prime minister called them that. The very fact that the president of the regime said that Gaza, there are no innocents in Gaza, or the minister of defense or the minister of genocide said they were going to cut off electricity and food and water and medicine to everyone, kids, infants. We're going to, strangle them all. That shows that that shows their worldview. That shows exactly who they are. And the fact that the West supported them in doing all this and hid these statements and tried to defend them uh, when the ICJ, you read the ICJ complaint. Uh, BBC did not broadcast the South African complaint, but the next day they showed the Israeli defense. It's clear where the West stands in all this, but um, but I think that this behavior in the West and Israel and its supporters is is what is going to ultimately bring about its downfall. Because when Palestinians are Amalek, that means Jordanians are Amalek. That means that the Lebanese are Amalek. That means Iranians are Amalek. That means everyone is Amalek. And that means that no one can ever seriously engage with Israelis because they are speaking from an ethno-supremacist position, even though they're not really a single ethnicity, and they're less Semites than the Palestinians on average. But still, they call themselves an ethnic state, and it's an ethno-supremacist state. So Israel is behaving irrationally.
Thank you for tuning in to my latest video. I appreciate all of your support. This channel, however, needs your help. I am seeking to make this channel more sustainable in the long term and upgrade necessary equipment to ensure that this work continues onward and makes progress to give you all of the geopolitical analysis that you all deserve. For that reason, I'm asking you to become a member of my Patreon community at patreon.com/DannyDhaiphong. You can find that link in the video description or in the pinned comment below. For whatever amount you choose to give, just know you are supporting independent media that you can't find anywhere else. Thank you so much, and I look forward to the next video.